Good morning, everybody. My name is Matthew Perry. Thank you for joining us today. I am the VMware Technical Alliance Manager within HPE, and today I'm joined by Clive Wendland from VMware.
Hi there. So as Matt said, my name is Clive Wendland. I'm a staff systems engineer. I work for the Integrated Systems Business Unit within VMware.
So thank you for joining us today. So overview of what we're going to present in the next hour or so. We're going to do a brief solution overview of both VCF from VMware and also Synergy, and then we're briefly going to go into workload domain creation, how we can bring up infrastructure within the VCF platform, but then also we're going to have a quick look at what Synergy is, how we can use OneView to drive Synergy, and then the better together messaging. So over to you, Clive.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. So yeah, what we're going to talk today about is bringing Cloud Foundation on top of the HPE Synergy platform, and we're going to just explain what Cloud Foundation is, how that works, show some demonstrations, but really try and extend some visibility into the integration work that we've done between the two platforms that really make it a pretty compelling solution in terms of integrating software and hardware.
So it was back in August 2017 at VMworld when it was first announced that HPE Synergy would be certified for running VMware Cloud Foundation. And in March this year, it was announced that the SY480 and SY680 compute nodes were certified as VCF ready nodes to run 231. But because of the composable nature of Synergy and the bladed form factor of the compute, we also need to certify a number of elements to deliver a fully engineered system to run VCF. And to that end, these are the elements on the right-hand side of the screen there that need to be certified to run VCF on Synergy. That's not to say you can't run other components within your Synergy environment that are not certified for VCF, but these are the items you will need to run VCF on Synergy.
Okay, so if we take a look at what Cloud Foundation is on top of the Synergy platform, what we're really doing from VMware is bringing together our best-of-breed technologies into a single integrated software stack that we can deploy automatically. So just have a little talk through the sort of baseline components there. The baseline for any SDDC is obviously virtualization. So we're using compute power from VMware vSphere. And we want to combine that to bring everything else into the same operational model as, say, deploying virtual machines. And so for that, we're using things like VMware vSAN for storage, which is our software-defined storage solution. We can use anything from, traditional disks with flash hybrid modes or all flash types of hardware as well. And we also bring in our VMware NSX to give us the networking capability as well. And then having compute, storage, and networking defined in the software is really the kind of baseline for the Cloud Foundation solution. Now, we keep taking that platform up higher as well into areas around, as you can see there, around intelligent operations or self-service and automation, and some chargeback as well. And all that's provided by the VMware vRealize suite, which Cloud Foundation can also extend out to optionally. If we want to go ahead and deploy the full SDDC, then we can do that directly from Cloud Foundation as well. Now, all those technologies, those kind of four main pillars, the compute, storage, network, and the cloud management platform, kind of our four pillars of primary infrastructure capability that we have within the SDDC, or the software-defined data center. The new component that we bring to this is around lifecycle automation. And to do that within Cloud Foundation, we're using a new component that we call an SDDC Manager. And this SDDC Manager is the new component that we get when we go to Cloud Foundation. It's that's going to be responsible for initial deployment and what we call bring up of our software-defined data center management components. And then it's going to do the initial configuration and make sure everything is compliant to the VMware validated designs or VMware best practices. Now, that's what we can refer to as day zero, the kind of initial deployment and initial configuration, that bring up phase that I spoke about. For day two, we're then looking at being able to rapidly deploy cloud infrastructure very, very quickly, that more akin to public cloud types of operational models, but also have something around patching and upgrades and make it massively simplified to upgrades across these four pillars of software that we deploy as part of the SDDC. And so it's SDDC Manager, it's really the new component here that adds that value into it. So when we look at the software bill of materials, as mentioned earlier, our core, our primary capabilities around vSphere, vSAN, and NSX. And that's kind of the mandatory base layer, I guess, for Cloud Foundation. But we can then extend that up higher, as I said before, to the vRealize suite. Whilst we can automatically deploy many of the capabilities as well, we also have a wider, broader terms of bill of materials that we use under Cloud Foundation. As I mentioned before, it's considered an integrated software stack. And so all of these software has been hardened and had scalability testing and lots of validations done to make sure that all this componentry works together. And the final sort of add-on component there you can see is the Horizon Suite, which we use for all our VDI and our app virtualization technologies as well. Again, all of these components have been validated as part of a broader bill of materials that we can use to complete the full software-defined data center. So when we are deploying all of this software, what are we deploying it as? So when we carve out infrastructure in the SDDC perspective, we call those pieces of infrastructure workload domains. And so what is a workload domain? Well, the workload domain in its simplest sense starts out as a dedicated vSphere cluster. Okay, so there we're going to deploy vSphere. It's going to have its own virtual center deployed and managing it as a cluster, and it will be connected into a platform services controller for single sign-on capabilities. But we'll also deploy its own dedicated vSAN data store across the cluster, which is discrete to that cluster. And we'll also deploy our own discrete instance of NSX as well. So we kind of get all data center services dedicated within that architecture. And then we can choose to integrate that further with our login site or vRealize operations or vRealize automation technologies as well. In terms of once we provisioned it, we can add those in as what we call endpoints in. So we can start deploying from vRealize operations, vRealize automation, and start monitoring it through vRealize operations management. Now, at the moment in Cloud Foundation architecture or VVD architecture, we have two types of workload domain. We have a management workload domain, which we build on default. I keep mentioning this term we call bring up, which is our initial configuration. And when we do that initial configuration, the management workload domain is what we are going to create. And that's where all the SDDC management systems will reside. And anything like all our vCenters, all our NSX managers, are all going to run in that management workload domain. And then the other type of workload domain we call virtual infrastructure workload domains, which, as they suggest, is a kind of a bare vanilla deployment of vSphere, vSAN, and NSX. Now, in terms of workload domains, I can run 15 in parallel. That's not anything to do with Cloud Foundation. That's because we're using enhanced link mode on the virtual centers, and that is the maximum supported vCenters we can have connected to each other using enhanced link mode. And from SDDC Manager, we have the ability to create, expand workload domains and delete them as well. We can also add clusters to them as well. So we have a lot of flexibility within there. And with that capability, we kind of moving the operational model so we can do stuff much faster, more in line with virtual machine management as well. So I mentioned the management workload domain. I say this is our place where we're going to operate the SDDC from. We do this through the bring up instance, and we're going to grab 4 nodes. The first 4 nodes that we will provision for Cloud Foundation will run the management workload domain. The reason we're on 4 is just so we know that we're going to have some resiliency for any kind of HA events, because we want everything to keep running. Now, in terms of what runs in the management workload domain, well, things like SDDC Manager will obviously run in there. That's what we use to do the bring up and the further management. But also things like our platform services controllers, that will be our single sign-on instance, all vCenter servers, NSX managers. If we choose to go and deploy elements of the vRealize suite, then they will be deployed into that management workload domain as well. And then just to look at the virtual infrastructure workload domains, again, this can be a minimum of 3 hosts, which is what we need for vSAN. Obviously, when we spin out new virtual infrastructure workload domains, we automatically connect those into the SSO domain. And we can support various configurations here, but reasonably heterogeneous. Obviously, if we're in a cluster, we want our host to be like for like, but we're actually free to mix and match configuration types of servers, which again lends itself quite nicely to the Synergy platform, because being able to change configurations dynamically has a lot of value when we're talking about agility. When we look at NSX, we deploy obviously an NSX manager. We connect that to the vCenter server, and we will do what we call the host preparation. So we'll insert all the VIBs that we need to deploy NSX. We'll create what we call a transport zone and a VXLAN. But apart from that, we don't do anything. It's sat there and it's a fresh vanilla install ready to go. If you want to start deploying edges or creating networks, you can do that. But you can also still do traditional VLAN back networks as well within that. And just to mention about what security capabilities we've got within there, and this is one of the sort of important reasons that bringing a lot of the elements of the SDDC together into an integrated platform have a lot of benefits, because the security is layered in various places. So even if we just looked at things like encryption technology, we have that both in the vSphere platform natively, and we also have that in vSAN natively as well. And none of that encryption technology requires any specialist hardware to invoke that encryption, as it were. We're doing everything in software. So for vSAN, we can do data at rest encryption, and for vSphere, we can do virtual machine encryption as well, where we can be a bit more selective. We don't have to encrypt everything in the data store. We can be more granular about what disks we want to be encrypted. We also have the choice about whether we want to have that for having encrypted vMotion, for example, if we're moving VMs around, or whether we want the I/O path to be encrypted as well. So we have some flexibility there. We obviously have microsegmentation from NSX, which gives us effectively the ability to put a firewall onto every single VM NIC that we have on all our virtual machines, and then have that firewall effectively move around with the virtual machine anywhere it goes within the SDDC. And then we can also have things like two-factor authentication and more of a virtual context to how we do things around firewalling. So, for example, we don't necessarily have to maintain IP tables to do all our firewalling. We can use various virtual machine objects to dictate that, whether it be an end user or, say, a cluster or a resource pool, or just straight up VM naming that we can use to influence that security policy.
So let's turn our attention now to why you would want to run VMware Cloud Foundation on Synergy. And so it's all about having a fluid pool of resource underneath that matches the fluid virtual platform that you're running on top of it. So we look at top of rack switching and the way that we can deploy rack scale fabric within Synergy. So if you're consuming VCF on a normal rack mount ready node, as and when you add more ready nodes to your existing infrastructure, then you have to log tickets, possibly with your network facilities, possibly with data center facilities as well, to rack and stack. Whereas the value proposition that Synergy gives you, it's a wire once networking and power situation with the frames. So you install the frames, you install the power, and you install the networking connections, and it's a wire once. So then as and when you add additional compute nodes, you don't need to contact facilities at all. It's just there for you to use. And that's giving you that real agility from a physical infrastructure perspective that you're to match what you're getting from that virtualization layer. Because we're using templates to define the infrastructure with Synergy, we're able to scale the storage and compute independently without the need to be in a data center to physically move disks from one server to another. So again, if we're looking at a rack mount ready node and you want to change the vSAN storage within a workload domain, you either don't consume the physical disks that are within a host, or you have to provision all of the disks, and you risk being over-provisioned or under-provisioned or having stranded capacity where you could be making full use of any capacity you have within the Synergy platform. And we're looking at infrastructure automation with soft-defined intelligence, so massive operational efficiencies. So again, you're getting massive operational efficiencies from your virtualization layer using the SDDC manager. And so we're delivering that same value at the hardware layer, so able to support workload domain creation via templates in an automated, streamlined manner, but also for decommissioning your workload domains as well, which is equally important. And one of the biggest value propositions of Synergy to VCF is that it is able to run applications outside of VCF. So again, if you're looking at a rack mount VCF node, then that is an island of resource and management to deliver one workload. If you're running your VCF workload on Synergy, then you gain additional operational benefits of being able to run those workloads that aren't capable to run on VCF or aren't ready to be transitioned over. So you can run bare metal, containerized platforms, and your VCF workload within a single physical infrastructure that you have a single management interface point with. So if we look at the actual elements of what is within Synergy, so for those of you familiar with our previous blade system infrastructure, it's a 10U enclosure, same power and cooling footprint that you get with the existing C7000, so no challenges there. We're able to have 12 slots to support compute modules, or we can support storage modules as well. And that's one of the key differentiators between the previous versions of blades and what Synergy delivers now is this ability to compose storage within the frame and allocate those drives to any host within the frame. So we also have the composable fabric. So again, those of you familiar with blade system of Yore, it's a virtual connect module. So again, we're using OneView to define what those virtual connect modules are configured as. So all of your internal networking, so for east-west traffic between virtual machines or physical hosts, they don't have to leave the virtual connect domain. They can all that traffic can stay within the enclosures. And all of this is powered by OneView. So within each frame, there are 2 slots for either a composer or an image streamer. But image streamer is outside of this VCF right now. But the composer is what defines everything. The composer is a physical appliance that is running OneView. And we're able to use that to define all those physical elements. So the value proposition of OneView is virtually the same as the SCDC manager. So it's doing that day zero discovery of the physical infrastructure that sits within the Synergy platform, but it's also doing the deployment as well. So you're defining what the compute is configured as, you're defining the storage, and you're defining the fabric in a template. So all of your internal resources from your networking team, your storage team, and your compute team can get together and define the best way to configure those resources within the frame and save that as a template and then deploy it multiple times. So you write once, you deploy many times. And as I mentioned, it's all about the lifecycle operation. So because it's software, it can be automated, it can be utilized from external resources to really streamline and deliver those operational efficiencies. And finally, we've got a single API, so that makes it easy for our partners to integrate with OneView and for OneView to be driven from external devices. And we'll talk about at a later point in the presentation about those integrations we have with those VMware products. So a couple of the features within Synergy that really help drive that value proposition for VCF to the next level. First off is the disaggregated storage for compute. So within the Synergy frame, we can have a number of compute nodes and we can have a storage enclosure as well. And what we can do with the OneView template for the hosts is we can define what drives within the drive enclosure that the hosts have access to. So that's where, by software, we're defining the vSAN storage elements. And because that's defined in software, that's very easy to create a workload domain. So one day it might be a low CPU, high disk vSAN environment. You bring that workload domain down, and then the next day it could be an entirely different ratio between the CPU and the drives, all using the same physical resources. And that gives you massive flexibility from a vSAN perspective. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier before, if you've got a static rack mount environment where the drives are bound to a single physical server, that's not flexible. So if you're changing your workload domain and the vSAN requirements are different, then you possibly have stranded capacity or not the right type of drives in there. So we've got massive flexibility within the platform from that perspective. And the other piece as well is around the virtual connect modules in the back. So within each host, we can have dual flex 20 NICs, and we can carve those NICs up 4 ways into 4 flex NICs. And as you can see from the screen, this is the 4 networks you need within a vSAN environment. So what we can do there is we can assign them to each profile to a different network, but then we can also guarantee a minimum bandwidth and a maximum bandwidth. So, but also we're allowing them to flex up and down as and when. So if you're vMotioning from one host to another and it needs more bandwidth than is defined, but it's available within that 20 gig port, then it can be readily consumed. So again, massive flexibility, don't have to worry about over provisioning. It's got lots and lots of bandwidth to deliver the performance when you need it.
Okay, so just take a little look at some of the functionality behind the SDC architecture, especially when we're looking at Cloud Foundation. First off, obviously everything is certified against the Synergy platform, and when we're looking at that specifically, we're talking about the vSAN Ready Node program, which is effectively what we use as our hardware compatibility guide for Cloud Foundation. So we're all certified on all the Synergy nodes, so you don't have to worry there, but that's how we're doing it. When we're looking at the management workload domain, I've mentioned this before, that we're looking for 4 nodes to get started. We can actually do 2 different types of topology. Just to get up and running, we can actually start with a minimum of 4. And that's what we call consolidated architecture, where our VI workload domain and our management workload domains actually run on the same cluster. But then when we're looking to sort of roll that out to other workload domains, we obviously need a minimum of 3. So usually your sweet spot for going between, what we call the consolidated architecture and the standard architecture is 6 to 7. So once you go to 7 servers, you're into standard architecture areas as well. In terms of scalability, we can pretty much go up to what we have in vSphere configuration maximum. So there's various ways we can slice and dice how we want our infrastructure to look underneath vSphere. And so you can reach some pretty hefty scalability under vSphere architecture, which we support under Cloud Foundation as well. When we look at things like sizing, obviously standard vSAN sizing is the key consideration there, about sizing for appropriate clusters and workload domains. Usual best practice there around what we do around cache and data drives. But just a nod to that, we do have a lot of flexibility on what we can do around, CPU capability, memory amounts, and as Matt pointed out, as a big compelling point is the fact that we've got disaggregated storage, so we can actually configure and reconfigure dynamically that hardware profile for the ready nodes here. And so we can have a lot of flexibility in terms of how we size up infrastructure. Again, it's one of the key sort of value propositions with the Synergy running Cloud Foundation. And so, yeah, just in terms of having all that equivalent configuration, that's really just in terms of keeping it within the cluster size. We want to have like architectures there just to make sure everything's happy, especially when we're thinking about things like DR and HA within that. But we also have the capability to then stretch out that storage as well. So when you're sizing and scaling out and thinking about the locality, these are just things to think about when we're designing workload domains within that. But we have the capability of stretching clusters across frames, across and then in effect across rooms and across metro distances as well, as per vSAN supports.
And so this is an example here of a vSAN ready node configuration on Synergy. So we have certified on the vSAN HCL, and we have the 480 and 680 Gen 10 platforms. Obviously, we need storage nodes because that's where the external drives are, and they support SSDs. So we support up to 4 terabyte SSDs, but we also support hard drives as well. So depending on your requirement, we're able to deliver you a vSAN solution using a combination of the certified ready node and then the external storage node. If you want to use NVMe, then the ready node also supports within the Synergy nodes. We support dual NVMe drives as well. So to give you whatever vSAN environment you need, we can do that. Also, I'll draw your attention to the right-hand side there. That's our virtual connect domain. So that's scaling up from 3 physical enclosures, and it appears as a single logical enclosure to one view. So that's our virtual connect domain. Our management domain can scale up to 21 frames. So as you see here, there's a number of examples of ways that you can run VCF on Synergy. So we have a single frame option, but obviously for resiliency and availability in production, you would probably be looking at 3 frame minimum. But as I mentioned earlier, the big value that Synergy delivers for VCF is it's able to run other workloads. So as you can see here, we have a single pair of composers managing 21 frames, and we have a VCF workload there in the middle, but then we could be running bare metal and other virtualization resources within the same physical infrastructure, but only a single point of management and life cycle for that whole piece of infrastructure.
Okay, so let's take a look at how we would go ahead and create workload domains. So before we go into the sort of full workload domain creation, the first things that we need to do is actually commission some hosts into the system. So we'll go ahead and do that first. So here we are in the SCC Manager interface. We'll click on the Host tab on the left-hand side, and then we'll go to go commission host. It'll ask us to pre-validate what we're doing, and it will do some validation checks as well. And those validation checks will be around things like, do we have DNS, in this case, fully qualified domain names, IP addresses. So as we go through that, we'll enter those details, get the fingerprint for it. We'll select what we call a network pool, and that's how we add our vSAN and vMotion networks into it. Once we've validated those pieces in there, we can just click on commission. And so what you'll see now is it'll kick off what we call a commissioning host workflow. And all workflows you can see at the bottom here, we have in a task pane, just like we have in the vSphere client. Now, under a workflow, we'll have all the subtasks that we need to create to complete that workflow. So you'll see here, it'll go through a whole load of configuration to add those hosts in terms of commissioning. So it'll be doing the preparation for vSAN and making sure that the network's all correct for NTP and DNS. Now we can just come to workload domains, and we can click on new workload domain. And we're pretty much set for a 5 or 6 step process here. We'll give it some names. So what do we call the domain? What do we want our vCenter to be IP'd as, and our username and accounts for all the components that we need, mainly around vCenter and NSX. So we add all our passwords in for that, and our FDQNs, FQDNs, sorry. Next, we'll then review. We can see there what that naming will then have an influence on what we call the objects. We'll set a policy for vSAN. One of the nice things here is if we don't have enough hosts in our inventory, then it won't actually let us select a policy that we can't support. So here we're going to be okay. We're going to select host tolerator 1. Next, we get to select the hosts, and some of these are the hosts that we've just done host commissioning on, but I guess the ideal situation would be we'd have a lot of servers just hanging around that we can deploy very rapidly. We then need to go and add our licenses to it. We can change licenses as per the capability that we require for it, and then once we've done that, we'll just review everything that we're going to do, and we can see all that there. See all our licenses, the hosts. We can just click finish, and then that will go away and then create the create workload domain workflow. So once again, we can see the task running. If we go down to our task menu, we can see the main workflow and the subtasks are running underneath that. And when we create virtual infrastructure workload domains, there's something like 55 separate actions that we need to do, and there's obviously quite a few reboots that we need to do as we're deploying all these different capabilities like vSAN and NSX onto the ESXi hosts. Also, we can be doing things like adding it automatically into vRealize login site, which we already have deployed in as part of our management workload domain. If we have appropriate licenses and we select the option, then we can actually have all our other workload domains automatically add into that login site configuration. So we know we can centralize all the logs for everything else that's in there. So whilst that's building, you can see those tasks running down at the bottom here. Here you can see we're in the web client. But you can see all the automation kicking in there on what we're doing in terms of configuring. So that last bit there, we could see that we were uploading the OVA for NSX Manager, and so we're going to get that deployed. And if you're sort of keen on there, you'll realize that we've done some speeding up here, but when you look at the total time frame here, it's roughly about an hour for us to bring up our infrastructure here. So once we create our workload domain, we can see we can come into it here. We've got some actions. We can delete it. We can come into our clusters view, and we can see that we've got one cluster there. We can add hosts to that cluster. We can also add separate clusters into this workload domain as well. So it's quite nice to have separation of things like database workloads or web tier workloads. And then under services, we can see, the two components that we had, the vCenter and NSX. We can see we'll sign on straight into the infrastructure. So we can see here, if we go to hosts and clusters, we've got our new cluster there, three nodes, and we can see those VMs that are running there are actually part of NSX. And this is a really cool component of integrating directly into vCenter with the HPE storage packs. So if we take a look here, Matt, did you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so what we have here is HPE surfacing the hardware information and firmware information up to the WebSphere client. So we have an integration between the one view running on the Synergy Composer and then the vCenter. And so what we're showing here is surfacing that information where we can show the physical and virtual networking. So we can see which VLANs are on which physical NIC.
Okay, so then we'll come back here. We're in SEC Manager. So what we're going to do is just go and delete that workload domain. We have some tick boxes that just to make sure, nice big red buttons to say, are you sure you want to do this? But then we'll go and clean that up. And this is one of the sort of important kind of game changers, I guess, where if you can combine what we can do with Synergy with what we can do with Cloud Foundation, you can really bring a new paradigm to the way we treat infrastructure in terms of how we treat its life cycle. If we have an automated, repeatable way of provisioning both hardware and the software on top of it, and we can do that very rapidly, then there's a notion that we could spin up and spin down infrastructure in the way that we run a public cloud. So now once we've done that, we're free to actually then go in and do a decommission on those hosts. As Matt said, we may want to use those hosts for something that we don't want to have in Cloud Foundation. So here we decommission those servers, and then they're free to go back into one view into the fluid pool, so we can be re-provisioned for something else later on. So I'll just go through all its cleanup there. So I think at that point we'll just take a quick dive into a live instance here. So let me just pass it over to Matt.
Sorry about that. Yes, so what we have here is the demo environment we had running in the CIC. And I'll Clive to take over and just drive you through the interface.
Yeah, we'll just take a little tour of what we can see here. So here we're in SEC Manager. And when we come into SEC Manager, we come into what we call a dashboard. And here we've got some nice portlets that we can take a look at. We can actually move all these around as well. So everything here is a portlet, so it's all clickable, and I can delete, and I can add new widgets as I see fit. So we can see here we've got two workload domains deployed. We can see we've got all flash hosts here, so we can differentiate between the two. We get a nice sort of high-level overview about what we've got from an aggregate perspective within Cloud Foundation. So an aggregate of the CPU, the memory, and the storage that we have in the infrastructure. And then we've got our recent tasks. But so before, we've got this nice recent tasks menu down at the bottom here as well. So let me just get rid of that quickly so we have a bit more real estate. Okay, and then the only other things that we can kind of do, Cloud Foundation is pretty simplified in terms of what we can do. We're obviously more worried about provisioning infrastructure and its lifecycle management. So under inventory here, you'll see we've got workload domains. So if I go into that, you can obviously get an aggregate of what workload domains. Here we have two. So we've got a management workload domain, and we've got a VI workload domain here. And we could do things like, if we click on this little widget here, we can add more clusters to that as well. You also see something else about here, which is connecting to vRealize products. So if we've got them deployed, we can, what's quite nice is we can dynamically add pieces of infrastructure into those solutions quite nicely. And then underneath that, we've got our host view. So this is where we'd come to do host commissioning. So here we get a list of all the hosts that we have. And here we can see host state. So we can actually see that they're currently assigned to their respective workload domains. But in an ideal state, we'll have ones here that are unassigned, and then they're just free for us to go and grab and do other things with in terms of provisioning. The next piece that we've got is the repository. So here is where we're going to see everything for our lifecycle management bundles here. So if we go into here, don't actually, we do, sorry. Here we have a Cloud Foundation update bundle here for 3010, which is, we'll run through a demo in that in a moment. But we can also see all the details about what that update will do and where it's applicable to as well. And then finally, the other piece that we've got is under administration. So if we just take a quick run through here, under network settings is where we have what we call network pools. And network pools is how we manage our VMKs or our VMware management kernel port groups. Specifically, what we're interested in here is vSAN and vMotion. So here we can pre-configure network pools that when we go and provision hosts, we can apply these network settings to them, and that's how we kind of dynamically can assign them to workload domains as we go along. We'll have a section where we can manage all our licensing, so we can enter those there and do some tracking as well. We also have a section for users, so we can add users and groups here. There's only a few roles within Cloud Foundation at the moment. We've then got update management. Again, that's all to do with our lifecycle management operations. Here is where we're going to configure our My VMware login. So once we connect that up to VMwareDevo.com, then that's how we're doing all the analysis between the software patches and bundles. If we move on down to vRealize Suite, here is where we can extend out optionally. If we have a licensing to do it, then we can extend deployment automation out to these components as well. So I mentioned that we actually deploy log insight by default. So here we can see that it's actually up and running. But you can see we've got this nice big click button here. If we've got the appropriate licensing, I can just click this enable, and that will add in configurations for any other piece of infrastructure that I deploy. Conversely, for things like vRealize operations, we don't have them deployed in this example, but we can just hit on deploy there and pretty much go for a pretty simple wizard here. So it's going to ask us some prerequisites. Just click select all for that. And then it will just run through a pretty simple deployment wizard here about, give me a license key, what kind of configuration do I want to deploy. So here we can do medium or small, medium, or large, and how many nodes that we want to deploy. And then it will just go and automatically deploy that into our management workload domain. Now we can also do the same for vRealize automation. That's a pretty hefty deployment. It'll actually deploy in enterprise mode and with high availability with multiple nodes. But again, if we click on that, it's going to take us through a pretty nice guided deployment wizard for it. So it's going to make sure we've done all our checking for everything. So if we just click OK for that. And then we go through, obviously it's going to ask us for our license key, it's going to ask us for the certificate chain that we want to use. And then it's got some other pieces here which are quite nice. It'll ask us for an OVA template for the Windows, because we'll automatically go and configure that as part of that deployment wizard. So just an example of what we can do around the vRealize suite there. Just to talk about these final two pieces, because they're worth talking about. When we look at the security tab here, one of the things that's really nice is we can manage certificates across the entire SCDC. So we can either have that configured with Microsoft as a CA, but if we just snip back up to workload domains quickly, and let's say we take a look at the management workload domain, we have some tabs under here, and if we go over to our security tab on this side, we can see that here is where we can do all of that certificate across the workload domain. So this is actually pretty much a first time for VMware in terms of the software-defined data center. I can select all these components here, and with that integration, I can go and generate a CSR. Then once I've done that, I can go and create certificates and install them across this workload domain. Now, we don't have to use it that way. We can obviously go over here and upload and install our own third-party ones, but that's a really nice feature. Really solves a lot of big problems across typical SDDC deployments as well. So yeah, just the only other final things to, I guess, point out is obviously from services here, we can jump into any of the componentry that we've got deployed. So if we want to jump into login site, I can single sign on from here, or any of other things like NSX controllers and so on. So I'll leave it there, and I'll hand it back to Matt to go on some other parts of the solution.
Thank you, Clive. So if we jump over to the vSphere web client, what we can see here is an overview of one of the hosts within the VCF environment. And what we've done here, we're in the monitor screen, and what we have here is the drop-down. From the drop-down menu, we have the overview. And so what we're here is surfacing the information. And what we can see here, that is it's node 1 of the VCF management domain. So we can see what physical host it is, the ID numbers, serial numbers, licensing information, where it is physically located, and the CPU and the memory. But also we can see here, looking at the physical adapter, mapping to the VM adapter, and the networks that reside on that. If we click on the drop-down menu and go to the networking diagram, this came up rather briefly in the previous piece of the presentation. This will give us a visual representation of the mapping of the networks against the physical ports, against the virtual ports, and the V switches once it comes up. And that's very useful, obviously, for fault finding, but also ensuring that you're following best practice within your environment. And what we're looking at and able to show is not only the information within the physical server host, but the information within the virtual connect module, but also the information for the top of rack switches. So we're able to communicate with all those devices and present that in a nice visual manner. But we'll pop back to that. So that's surfacing information, and that's the integration that HPE had within vCenter. We also have integrations with LogInsight that Clive mentioned earlier, so we're able to surface information about the physical resources into that VMware platform, but then also we have integration with vRealize Operations and vRealize Orchestrator as well. So a lot of integrations between the physical platform and OneView surfacing all that physical information up into those VMware dashboards. If we jump over to OneView, so OneView is as I said, it's a piece of software that is managing and defining the physical infrastructure within the Synergy environment. And what we hear is the main dashboard for when you log in. So different users within your environment can have different views and be either full admin rights or restricted admin rights. So maybe your VCF admins will only have access to the physical resources aligned to the VCF environment. But what we can give here is a customizable view for each user depending on their needs. And so what we have here is a number of donuts surfacing information, and as you know, it's the traffic light thing, green good, yellow, bit of a warning, red bad. But as we can see from the environment, everything is fine, which is nice. So let's just click on the server profile. So as we see here, we have 8 server profiles, because what we have is 8 physical hosts within our environment. We have 4 in the management domain, so node 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then as you can see on the left, we have 4 nodes within our vSAN workload environment. And what we've got here is we're applying, this is just a demonstration of applying different profiles to the physical resources within your environment. So all of the management nodes have this same hardware profile software profile template there, so for management nodes. And what we can do is we can click onto that, hyperlink into that, and we can have a deeper look into what that looks like. So we can hit edit there, and we'll see. So we can give it a name, and we can give it a description. We can see here the server profile, so it's what hardware type that this profile is aligned to, and the enclosure group as well. And we can also do an affinity either to Bay or Bay and physical host as well. If we can look at, we have options around OS deployment, but obviously within a VCF context, that's not going to work because the SDDC manager takes care of that thing. So we can look at firmware as well. So here we have a click down, and you can select whether you want to manage it manually, or you can apply a SPP that you've uploaded and created within OneView. So we can do some firmware management there as well. And then we can also here look at the networking connections as well. So as we can dive into that a little deeper later on. And so we can look at local storage. So as I said, these drives are not local to this physical server. They're set in externally, as you can see. It says in type external logical JBOD. So from a vSAN perspective and a VMware perspective, these disks are local to the host. So, and from that, we can select different drives according to our needs for the vSphere, vSAN environment. And then we can select some other options as well around BIOS management, boot settings, etc. So let's come out of that. And let's go back to our main menu. And as I said, so we've got server profiles, we've got some server hardware, and we can have a look at our enclosure as well. So this is a nice visual representation of our enclosure, and we can see lots of information. So we can see the 4 management nodes on the top, and we can see the 4 workload main nodes at the bottom. And in bay 5 there, what we have is the drive enclosure, and that consumes 2 bays. So again, it's very useful to see what's going on within your environment. Obviously, if we had more than one frame in a single logical enclosure, then we would see all 3 of those. But because we've got a single enclosure in this setup, that's all we get a visibility of. And we can also see what's going on at the back as well. So we can see we've got a pair of SAS modules. So that's helping us to connect those physical compute nodes to the disk enclosure as well. And we have a pair of virtual connect modules as well. So if we can jump straight into the drive enclosure just to show you what's going on there. And so what we have is then a view of what's going on in the enclosure. We can see the types of drives available to us, and if we hover over them, we can see if they're being used or not. So this drive here, we can see is aligned to management node 1, and we can see the capacity and the drive type, and we can also name it as well. That's the part of the cached here. We also see the information on our I/O adapters, so it's dual 12 gig SAS, so we're able to make use of both connections on the back end of the SAS drives. vSAN no longer supports SATA drives, so it's SAS all the way, and we get excellent bandwidth, and there's no oversubscription within the Synergy frame from that perspective. Pop back to our dashboard again. The next piece I'd like to show you is around firmware management. So pop into the firmware bundle. So this is how we can manage the life cycle firmware within the system. So what we need to do is update a SPP or a service pack for clients, and what that delivers is a nice package bundle of firmware and drivers for the specific hardware platforms that you have. And we've done all the internal testing, so you know that once you apply that to your physical host, that it will take care of all the interdependencies, and you can create custom versions yourself depending on your needs. So if we go to a server profile, and we go to one of the vSAN worker nodes, you can see that this is the firmware management is actually being applied to these nodes. So it's different from the management node. So what we can do here is select from the drop-down, select a different SPP if we create a custom one, and then we can apply that to the physical nodes that are out there within our VCF environment, and we can do a rolling firmware update for those hosts without impacting on any of the users. Because what we will do, we will take the host, we will put it into maintenance mode, we will apply new firmware, and then we could take it out of maintenance mode and then move on to the next host. So again, that's the great integration we have between OneView and vCenter there. So that's the lifecycle management all within the template that is applied to the physical resources. I think lastly, I just quickly jump to networks as well. So these are the networks we have within our VCF environment. As you can see, we've got vSAN, vMotion networks and manage. And what we can do with those individual networks is we can bundle them up together into a single network set. So if we click on this network set, then we can apply these network sets to the profile of a physical host. And that means that every time we do that, all of those hosts have access to those networks there. So again, streamlining the bring up and the whole life cycle management within there. So over to you, Clive.
Yeah. Okay. Right, so yeah, just to sort of extend on from that, when we talk about lifecycle management for Cloud Foundation, we're really trying to solve one of the big problems about bringing together kind of our best of breed technologies, specifically when we look at vSphere, vCenter, vSAN, and NSX. The reality is that those all have different release cadences and will come out at different points. One of the problems that a lot of customers tend to have when they're deploying SDDC is how to deal with this dependency mapping. How do they know what version of vSAN will work with NSX, and what's the order that it needs to be done in? And effectively, with Cloud Foundation, what I can do is start worrying less about those individual versions and worrying more about the high-end numbers. So the example here, you can see 231 to 232 mapping. What we're really simply doing is letting SDC Manager take care of all of that for us. And not just that, about deciding, in terms of a bill of materials and what bundle do I need for my platform, but what's the order that needs to be configured against my workload domains, and what's the order that needs to be done in there. So we just wanted to try and make that really simple, take care of all of the updates, sort of collating and validating the bill of materials, but also how we go ahead and apply that. We make this really, really simple. As I showed you in the interface where we connect it up to myvmware.com, to depot.vmware.com. And then, if pretty much like the App Store, if we've got a piece of software that's doing it's pretty cool. Take a look, show it, review it, and then apply it. So, whilst a lot of people say one-click upgrades and say it's a couple of clicks, but it's not far off. So, here we are again. We're back in the SDC Manager interface. We go into our repository. We go into bundles, and here we can see that we've got the update bundle here for 301. We can go and take a look at the information for that. So you can see we've got some links to release notes that we can go and take a look at. And we can click on view details, and we can see all the components that are going to be affected for it. So here it's pretty much an update for Cloud Foundation, not a lot else. So it's only going to affect the components that we have running under Cloud Foundation. You can also see that it applies to the management workload domain. So we can just click on that and come straight into this point here and see the same information. We can see all the patches that are there. And we can see that we've got either schedule it or download it. But before we go ahead and do that, we probably want to run a pre-check. So this is a really nice feature that will go ahead and check that the infrastructure is in a fit state to have all this upgrade applied to it. So once we've done that pre-check and we're happy about that, we'll have another sort of last check that we're ready to go with it. And once we're ready to go, we only have two options really. We can either hit, go and deploy this update now, or schedule it. Once it's finished, it will obviously run through everything. We can monitor it through the dashboard, and we can look through the logs. And once that's done, then we can see we've got some updates there. Now, this can also, this is just pointing back to the stuff that Matt was showing a little bit earlier about. It's a question that we get an awful lot when we're doing the lifecycle upgrades. How do I update the firmware at the back end? And this is one of the kind of the unique differentiators, I think, let's see what we can do in the Synergy platform. So like Matt was showing just a little bit earlier about what we can do about, pretty much instantaneously updating that software through OneView, software for the firmware dynamically, and instantaneously here we can see that we're just applying the new profiles, add it to the new servers, and then you can see it's pretty much just a compliancy question here to say, well, bring them into compliance to what our new baselines are as well. So again, I get this question a lot about, how do I keep both of these in lockstep? And here's a really good example about where the integration work that we've done together it really makes for a powerful solution. Okay. So that's it from lifecycle management. I think we'll just talk a little bit about what we can do, what we've announced at VMware Barcelona about really taking the work we've done against the Synergy for accreditation up to the next level. And so when we look at that, what we've got at the moment, we've obviously shown you a lot of demonstrations where we're showing you two interfaces. We're showing you SDDC Manager and we're showing you to OneView as well. Now, there's always going to be a need to have some of that capability, particularly around things like firmware and spinning out new networks, but we're certainly starting down the journey where we want to have a single place to do all of this for. And this is really what we've been doing for 3.5 in terms of having that composability driven directly from SDDC Manager. And that's really the difference between the two. So the way we'll do that, I'll pass it over to Matt to talk a little bit about how we go ahead and do that against Redfish.
Thank you, Clive. Yes. So absolutely. So this was what was announced at VMworld 2 weeks ago. So from 3.5, there will be a new service within the SDDC Manager called the Composability Service. And that's got some new APIs that it's exposing down to OneView. So there's also the OneView connector. So HPE, we have a OneView connector for VCF. And what that is doing, it's taking the API commands from the SDDC Manager and then translating them into Redfish API commands that we can then push down to the OneView instances that are managing our Synergy infrastructure. So from that perspective, what we're able to do then is deliver greater integration and actually drive some of OneView directly from the SDDC Manager. So as Clive said, the day zero tasks will still need to be done within OneView, but what we're enabling our customers to do is do a lot more of the lifecycle management directly from the SDDC Manager interface, because now we've got the SDDC Manager talking direct, being able to instruct OneView, not quite talking directly. But then it's just a further example of those integrations, as I mentioned before, with OneView and vCenter, vRealize Operations, vRealize Orchestrator, Log Insight, and now with the SDDC Manager. So we're getting a much tighter integration between the software-defined elements of Synergy, which is OneView, and then the management piece within VCF, which is defining the software elements from a VMware perspective.
Yeah, it's just nice to point out, as you mentioned, that vCenter piece. One of the nice parts about the firmware updates is that when you do that, you'll talk directly to vCenter to do things like maintenance mode. So it's just nice backward compatibility, and this is another example of extending it. But just coming back to the topic, just to give you some sneak peeks about what this will look like in the new version of Cloud Foundation. Here we can see here, as Matt was talking about, connecting to a Redfish API layer. Here is where we can go and connect to that. So we'll put in some credentials for that and authenticate against the Redfish API. Once we can do that, then we can start reading some of the inventory that OneView can provide back in directly into the SDDC Manager. And then from there, we'll effectively go ahead and do some composability workflows as part of SDDC Manager. So that's just a quick overview about what we've got coming further. I think it's getting more and more exciting around what we can do between Cloud Foundation running on top of it, and of course Synergy being the first true composable certified system that we have against Cloud Foundation. So really excited to have this sort of next level capability coming down the line. Okay, so I think we're pretty much there. So it's just a summary, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully, as you've seen from the demonstrations and the slides we presented, Synergy really is the best platform for running your VCF workload. It's the only physical infrastructure out there right now that is able to match the SDDC value proposition, picking them up and the whole lifecycle management from a single interface. So when you're creating a workload domain and carrying out that lifecycle management at a virtual level, we're able to integrate the two products and drive that management of the physical infrastructure underneath. So then creating the workload domain, bringing down the workload domain, that whole lifecycle piece is nice tight integration from both sides of the house.
Yeah, I'd say when we're looking at the two joined together, it's when we're trying to hit what is really that point about emulating public cloud operational models, but doing that on-prem. You really need something that can rapidly provision the infrastructure in a way that public cloud does. And when we bring these two together, in terms of just deploying it, doing day two, having that agility, you can see there's the integration work that really sort of delivers on that kind of solution, effectively making private cloud way more viable. Okay, so I think that's pretty much all we have. I think we'll just have a quick check for any questions that we've got on the line. I'm not sure if we've got anything there. But if you do have questions, obviously just put them into the Q&A panel, and we'll try and answer them if we can. I think we're all good for questions, so I think with that, we'd like to thank you for your time today, and hopefully it's been informative, and you'll go ahead and check out for other information, but you can obviously reach out to our respective organisations for any more information on it.
Absolutely. So please reach out to your HPE account manager or your VMware account manager if you want to delve into these technologies any further. But thank you all for your time. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot.